Drake and his October's very own. And you know what? This gonna be kind of sad for the people that be on Twitter and fucking social media with OVO in y'all name. Like, y'all be wearing that brand like y'all getting paid for it. So wait, y'all don't want no royalties? All the people that got owls in y'all names, got OVO, y'all don't want no royalties? Damn, y'all want to get paid for the shit that y'all doing? Y'all out here fighting internet battles. Y'all doing all this shit for Drake. Y'all don't want to get paid? Oh, but Molly Santana could get $500K though. Hey man, look, I'm just saying, man, the way y'all be going hard for this, man, I don't understand why y'all don't want to get paid for it.
You already know where this is going, don't you? You saw the headline. You saw the lawsuits piling up. You saw the private jets still flying, the $1 million casino bets, the constant flood of new music. And something in your gut told you it didn't add up, because it never does. Not with these people. Not with the ones who flex the hardest while the walls are closing in around them. Let me take you back to June 2026. A lender named RI filed a civil claim in the Supreme Court of British Columbia. Nothing unusual about that on its surface, but then you read the details, and your stomach dropped. Because what they revealed was the financial autopsy of a brand that was supposed to be untouchable. OVO, October's very own. The empire built on all logos and bravado. They defaulted. They applied for forbearance, which in plain language means they looked a lender in the eye and said, we can't pay right now. Pause the payments. Stack on the interest if you want. But we don't have it. We're broke. Now, you and I both know, you can't say that word when you've spent the last 5 years mocking everyone else for not having money. Can't do it. There's a line in a song, you know the one, about wanting to see someone struggle with their phone bill, about laughing at regular people who can't keep up. And look, I'm not here to moralize. I'm here to point out what happens when the universe serves you the exact plate you've been serving everyone else. This isn't karma, not exactly. This is something simpler. This is math. Let me walk you through what the complaint actually says, because the numbers tell a story that the music videos won't show you. RI provided financing through multiple transactions in 2025, a senior secured credit facility in May, then 5 separate convertible promissory notes between July and August. The aggregate principal was approximately $5.2 million. $5.2 million, borrowed, not earned. Borrowed. And here's the part that should make you pause. The timing, 2025. What was happening in 2025? You remember. I remember. That was the year the stomping started. That was the year the battle went from subliminals to full-scale warfare. So you have to ask yourself, why would someone at that level need to borrow $5.2 million from an institutional lender? Why not just write a check? Why not just call the accountant and move some money around? The answer, and I need you to stay with me here, the answer is that the money wasn't there. It had never been there. Not in the way the public assumed. The filing says OVO generated approximately $72 million in revenue during 2024. That sounds impressive until you read the next line. They sustained approximately $12 million in cumulative losses between 2022 and 2024. So they're generating revenue, but they're bleeding cash every year like a sieve. This is the part that never makes it to the Instagram stories. You see the private jets. You see the chains. You see the casinos. You see the watches. You don't see the ledgers. You don't see the forbearance agreements. You don't see the formal notices of default that started piling up in February 2026. And they sent those notices, multiple of them, like a bill collector calling a deadbeat. Except this deadbeat owns a brand that people tattoo on their bodies. This deadbeat has fans fighting internet battles for free. For free. You know who I'm talking about. The ones with the alls in their names. The ones wearing the brand like they're getting paid for it. And the narrator in the source material made a point that I can't stop thinking about. He said, y'all don't want royalties. Y'all don't want to get paid for the stuff you're doing. You're fighting internet battles for Drake, for nothing. Meanwhile, Molly Santana gets $500,000. That's the economy of the empire. The people at the top get paid. The people at the bottom get a logo. Now here's where it gets interesting. The forbearance agreement, March 20, 2026. OVO signed a formal document acknowledging that the defaults were real, that they were continuing, that they were valid, and that the debt was unconditionally owing. No defenses, no counterclaims, no deductions, no reductions. They said, we owe this money. We just can't pay it right now. Give us time. And the lender said, okay, we'll work with you. We'll give you grace. We'll let you figure it out outside of court. Because on paper, you're a globally recognized consumer brand. You have substantial enterprise value. You're Drake. You're good for it. And that's what everybody thought. But then May 27, 2026 came, and a wire payment of approximately $3.8 million arrived. Finally, some movement, some sign of life, some indication that the empire could still scrape together cash when it needed to. Except the complaint says something that should make every single person watching this stop and rewind. The payment did not originate directly from OVO. It came from an account identified as ADG Sound Inc. Management account. Reference OVO notes. Who the hell is ADG Sound Inc? Who the hell is Jessica Drake? That's what I asked myself when I saw that name, because the filing says ADG Sound Inc. is the entity behind Drake Sound Advice, a Los Angeles-based corporation led by someone named Jessica Drake, not the artist, a separate entity, a third party, which means someone outside the organization had to step in and wire money to a lender to stop the bleeding, an outside management company, a corporation with a different name, a different structure, a different identity. And why would you do that? Why would you hide behind a third-party wire? Why wouldn't you just pay from the OVO account? Because you're trying to create distance. You're trying to create deniability. You're trying to create a narrative where the money trail doesn't lead directly back to you. It's the oldest trick in the celebrity finance playbook. You don't go broke the way normal people do. You don't wake up with $0 in your checking account. You see the brokenness coming. You see it on the horizon. You feel it creeping in. And you start making moves. Desperate moves. You borrow from one lender to pay another. You seek external growth capital while you're fighting a lawsuit. You bank on $1 billion payday that never comes. You flood the market with music not because you love your fans, not because you're passionate about the art, but because the bills of your lifestyle are officially due. I want you to think about that phrase for a moment. The bills are due. Think about what that means in the context of someone who's built an entire persona around being untouchable, around having more money than God, around looking down on everyone else. And now this, a lender in British Columbia asking for $4.6 million, with contractual default interest, with legal fees, with lender expenses, with enforcement costs, and they're not going to stop. They're not going to settle. They're not going to reduce. Because the forbearance agreement locked OVO in. You can't go back later and say the debt isn't yours when you signed a document saying exactly the opposite. You can't apply for forbearance and then pretend you don't owe the money. That's not how it works. And the people at RI knew that. They structured the agreement specifically to eliminate any wiggle room. No defenses, no counterclaims, no deductions, no reductions. They said follow through, make that payment. And what did Drake do? He paid $3.8 million, not the full amount, not even close to the full amount. Just enough to show some good faith, just enough to buy more time, just enough to keep the lawyers at bay while he figured out his next move. And that next move is what truly reveals the desperation underneath the luxury. He's trying to sell half of OVO, 50%, to Authentic Brands Group, the same corporation that owns Forever 21, that owns Reebok, that owns mass market mall brands. Brands that have nothing to do with hip-hop, nothing to do with Toronto, nothing to do with the culture that built the OVO mystique. This is what happens in a fire sale. You liquidate whatever you can to cover immediate debts. You sell your birthright for a bowl of porridge. You take the corporate money because the alternative is worse. And here's the part that I can't shake. The part that makes this story so much bigger than one artist, one brand, one lawsuit. He's been doing partnerships with Disney, with Marvel, with McDonald's, youth-adjacent brands, the same audience he's been in court suing about being associated with. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. He's suing to protect his image from being associated with certain things. And simultaneously, he's whoring himself out to every major corporation that will cut him a check. And the music, my God, the music. 3 albums in rapid succession, a flood of content so massive that nobody else can compete. Independent artists paying out of pocket to promote their work, to fund their dreams, while the biggest artist in the world uses every algorithm trick, every streaming bot strategy, every corporate partnership, just to turn public attention into cash. Think about that. Think about what it means for the independent artist, the one who's grinding, the one who can't afford a private jet, the one who's paying for studio time out of their own pocket. They're competing against someone who's flooding the market for survival, not for art, not for expression, for survival, for liquidity, to pay the lenders, to keep the banks from freezing his assets, to stop the foreclosure on a lifestyle that was never sustainable in the first place. And you know what the craziest part is? Kendrick hasn't said a word, not one word. He's been quiet, silent, watching from the sidelines. And in that silence, there's a power that Drake can't access. The power of not needing to perform wealth. The power of not needing to prove anything. The power of letting the other person destroy themselves with their own momentum. Because that's what's happening. The more Drake runs from the financial reality, the more he exposes himself. The more he releases music, the more transparent his desperation becomes. The more he partners with corporations, the more he reveals that the independence he once represented was always just a brand, just a costume, just a logo. I need you to understand something about the way celebrities go broke. It doesn't happen overnight. They don't wake up one morning and realize they're destitute. It happens slowly. It happens incrementally. It happens in the deals they make when they're scared, in the partnerships they accept when they're desperate, in the forbearance agreements they sign when they can't pay, in the third-party wires from mysterious corporations led by people named Jessica Drake. It happens when they start selling half their business to companies that own Forever 21, when they flood the market with music because streaming numbers are their only remaining asset, when they can't be seen taking a commercial flight because their brand depends on the illusion of unlimited resources. That's the trap. That's the prison. And this particular trap has been set for a very long time. The bragging, the flexing, The constant need to show everyone that you have more than they do, that you're better than they are, that their problems don't apply to you. The problem with that kind of image is that it requires constant fuel, constant cash, constant performance. And when the cash runs out, the performance gets more frantic, more desperate, more obvious. And the people who once celebrated you start to notice. They start to see the cracks. They start to ask questions. They start to wonder why you're making so much music so fast. They start to wonder why you're selling your brand to Forever 21. They start to wonder who ADG Sound Inc. really is. And I'm just gonna say something that's been sitting in my chest for a while. I'm not happy about any of this. I don't take pleasure in watching someone fall. But I also can't pretend that this isn't exactly what so many of us suspected all along. The wealth was always more illusion than reality. The empire was always more credit than cash. The brand was always more logo than substance. And the people who built their identity around that logo, who fought internet battles for free, who wore the owl like a badge of honor, they were always the ones paying the real price. So what happens next? What happens when the lenders stop giving grace? What happens when the forbearance agreement expires? What happens when the courts say no more extensions? What happens when the banks freeze the assets? What happens when the corporate partners realize they're dealing with a distressed asset? What happens when the music stops selling the way it used to? What happens when the algorithm turns against him? What happens when the fans who fought for free finally realize they were fighting for a ghost? You already know, don't you? You already know what happens when the bill collectors come for someone who spent their whole life mocking the people who couldn't pay. You already know what happens when the empire collapses under the weight of its own arrogance. You already know what happens when the flexing stops working. You already know what happens when the silence from the other side becomes louder than the noise from the desperate one. The lawsuits are public. The forbearance agreement is public. The corporate fire sale is public. The third-party wire is public. The defaults are public. The losses are public. Everything is documented. Everything is verified. Everything is real. And yet the machine keeps spinning. The music keeps coming. The partnerships keep getting signed. The image keeps getting projected. But the machine is running on fumes. And fumes run out. I want to leave you with this, because I think it's the most important piece of the whole puzzle. When someone spends years telling the world how much better they are than everyone else, how much more money they have, how much more power they wield, how much more status they occupy, the universe has a way of testing that narrative. And right now, right this moment, the test is happening. The numbers don't lie. The contracts don't lie. The lenders don't lie. And the cold math of finance is something that no amount of bravado can overcome. So where does that leave us? Where does that leave the people who believed in the image? Where does that leave the fans who fought for free? Where does that leave the independent artists competing against a fire sale disguised as creative output? I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. I know what I see. I know what the court documents say. I know what the numbers reveal. I know what the timing suggests. I know who ADG Sound Inc. is. Or at least I know what the filing says about it. But I don't know how this ends. Nobody knows. Because the machine hasn't stopped yet. The music is still dropping. The jets are still flying. The bets are still being placed. The image is still being maintained. But the cracks are getting wider. And the silence from the other side is getting louder.